Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining the Synthetic Intelligence Forum online. My name is Vic. I'm the host of the Synthetic Intelligence Forum, and today I'm very pleased to welcome a special guest to this live stream. We have Marc Brouillard, who is the Acting Chief Information Officer for the Government of Canada. I've had the privilege of calling Marc a colleague, and from the very first days of my arrival in Ottawa, I've benefited from Marc's just excellent leadership and guidance and mentorship and helping me to understand how IT and more broadly information strategy works within the Government of Canada. So very happy that Marc has joined us today to talk about a very important topic, which is keys to developing a successful AI strategy. Now, Marc doesn't need an introduction, but I always like to say that this is going to be recorded and viewed by folks from all over the world. So without further ado, I'm going to first of all bring Marc onto our live stream. Thank you, Marc, for joining us. And can I request you to please maybe tell us a little bit about your role and how it is that your work entails designing and implementing AI strategies for the Government of Canada? Over to you, Marc.
Sure. Thanks, Vic. And first, thank you for having me. I'm very happy to be here. And good afternoon to everyone who is watching. A little bit about myself. I started in the private sector. I did about 20 years in IT consulting. Worked a lot with the high-tech sector in Ottawa, Nortel's JDSs of the world, as well as inevitably, if you're in Ottawa, the public sector. Which gave me my first taste of what government life and work was all about. Did a bit of a startup as well in the e-commerce space, which was a lot of fun. And then I came to the government about 10 years ago, and it was for a one-year job, and I liked it so much I stayed. I became the departmental deputy CIO for the Treasury Board. I then, in 2016, became the Chief Technology Officer for the Government of Canada as a whole, which is also within the Treasury Board, but we have two organizations, our internal IT and then the government-wide IT. And then almost exactly a year ago, I became the Acting Chief Information Officer of Canada, and have been doing that ever since. And certainly during the pandemic, it's been a very interesting and wild ride. Amazing ups and downs. Obviously, the pandemic itself was very challenging and very hard on all of us. But the government really rose to the challenges. At first by making the infrastructure requirements available so that over 200,000 GC employees could work from home. Large credit to that goes to Shared Services Canada, who enabled the remote access, the bandwidth. Also a very large acceleration of our cloud deployments. So that really enabled the employees of the public service to be able to be as effective as possible in these new and challenging times. And then also worked a lot with the programs that were being rolled out by the government to support Canadians at large, the CERB benefits and different things like that. So really got to see what can happen when we put our mind to addressing some of these challenges. And so it's been a very interesting year. The challenge isn't over. We're all in this together, but we're continuing to work very hard at it. So that's it. That's me.
Thank you, Marc. That's excellent. Thank you. And again, kudos to you and the team and the broader ecosystem that came together and rallied behind each other to get us completely connected and working as though we're all working from the office. So thank you, Marc, to you and for your leadership. Now, focusing on the topic at hand, which is the keys to developing successful AI strategies, I think the first question that's worth asking is, Marc, in your mind, what factors are crucial or essential for guaranteeing the success of an AI strategy?
Sure. So before I can talk about what a success of an AI strategy looks like, I would start with what does success of AI in general look like. So for the Government of Canada, that would be about delivering better service to Canadians, services that are faster, easier to use, and are fair. It is always in IT about the business, and regardless of the business you're in, whether it's research, whether it's defense, whether it's service delivery, whether it's regulatory, all of these capabilities that the government offers can be improved and augmented with the use of artificial intelligence. But it's also about using evidence-based and data-driven decision-making to inform that science and those regulations, and proactively managing the risks of AI, addressing biases in the data and the algorithms, ensuring that we can explain the predictions of the AI systems and what we can and can't delegate to machines. At the end of the day, no one is going to accept the response, well, we don't know what happened, the machine did it. So we need to be able to explain what we're essentially delegating to these machines in terms of either decision making or processing, and I'll get into that a little bit later. At the end of the day, it's about making Canada a recognized leader in AI. So I think we all have interest in that. So if those are the success goals, what does an AI strategy need to do to support that? So it needs to build organizational capacities. We need to foster cross-sector collaboration. We need to support the AI ecosystem. We need to advance international digital cooperation. And we need to ensure that we have responsible AI addressing the ethical issues such as data bias. So the outcomes of that strategy could include an ability to attract and retain the right talent, including policy, technical, legal, and ethical experts, a collaborative research and development environment involving stakeholders from public sector, industry, and academia, a significant influence in global standard setting processes, ensuring that Canada values and prioritizes, and our priorities are reflected in a global AI standards and norms, and a well-established principles and processes to ensure the responsible AI environment is grounded in human rights, something important to all Canadians. So addressing the ethical and legal risks of AI, such as bias or lack of transparency, is essential to building back the public trust. As an example, we developed the Directive on Automated Decision-Making, along with the Algorithmic Impact Assessment, to address both these legal and ethical impacts of automated systems. The GC is a great place to contribute to Canada's evolving approach to AI. So I would put it out that anyone who is watching this and interested in working for the government, AI is a great place to be. Canada needs to maintain a global leadership in responsible AI, including an actively shaped standards and norms through international organizations and fora like the GPAI at the OECD. So that's my answer.
Thank you, Marc. That's great, and thank you also for noting very kindly that yes, indeed, the Government of Canada is a great place to work to advance the state of practice and indeed even the state of the science behind artificial intelligence. So, Marc, you very nicely touched on some of the factors that go into an AI strategy. So, one question I have for you that naturally follows from this, Marc, is what does success look like in the development of an AI strategy?
So, I think some of those factors that you talked about are data, value add, culture, capacity, and infrastructure. So let's break those down a little bit and maybe start with the data. Data is the fuel for all AI systems. We need data to train AI. We need data to discover what AI can tell us. But we need to manage data appropriately because it can be a great accelerator, but it can also create risk. The data is a mirror to ourselves, and we have to understand that all of our data, all of our existing and past information is going to have built into it all of the biases that humans bring to that data, any of our processes, any of our assumptions, any of our past policies. So we need to invest in efforts such as cleaning up the data, making sure we understand what's in it, and making the data accessible and discoverable. Data used to train or refine algorithms should be fit for purpose. They should be accurate. They should be representative. And it's critical. This is critical to minimizing the risks of bias or discriminatory outputs. The adoption of data standards can help improve quality and enable interoperability of AI data. Our directive also requires federal institutions to test and monitor for bias and ensure data quality. It also requires the publication of a description of training data that was used for development in the case of automated decision-making systems of higher levels of impact, and I'll talk about that a little later on. The value of AI systems to business objectives should be clear. For example, will it yield optimized processes or enhance decision-making? Or in the case of government, will it enhance service delivery, science, or evidence-based decision-making? Cultural elements also need to be addressed in adopting AI. Transparency and collaboration are essential. Data and AI literacy are necessary to understand these strategies and help translate it into concrete actions. And a digital mindset where every challenge is approached from a data lens is required, not just by the people developing the AI, but the people who are going to use it and the people that are asking for it. So people with cross-disciplinary skills and competencies are going to be required. This includes technical, but also legal, ethical, and policy expertise. And the AI workloads require digital infrastructure to support them. So we need to store and process very large amounts of data. We need to have access to large amounts of compute power, including GPUs. Organizations need to leverage cloud computing to meet these demands, especially around interoperability. And as we're seeing, more and more AI is going to be built in components that talk to each other. And our infrastructure needs to enable that. It needs to enable easy discoverability, but also fast and reliable interconnectivity. Thank you.
Thank you, Marc. That's great. And I noticed in both of your answers, Marc, you really stress the importance of factors such as explainability, interpretability, privacy, debiasing, fairness. So keeping all of these things in mind, Marc, how would you say that ethical and responsible concerns and factors can be brought into an AI strategy?
Absolutely, great question. So legal and ethical principles need to be foundational. They need to be not an afterthought, but designed from the beginning. They can inform the strategic drivers and objectives and guide decisions on AI development and use. In particular, we have to ensure explainability and traceability. As I mentioned, we cannot ever explain to a Canadian that we don't know what happened, we don't know why their application was rejected, the machine just said so. So the ability to understand and explain where decision-making happened is critical. This becomes an even greater challenge when multiple AI systems are used in the decision chain. We have to be able to point back to where decisions came from and what were the critical pieces of data that influenced those. So we developed a directive on automated decision-making a couple of years ago, and it's really rooted in those legal and ethical principles, and it focuses on risks related to automation. So we look at it not from the technology perspective, but on the impact perspective. What are the risks to Canadians of these particular automated decision-making systems? I always use the example, if you're booking a campground, and we're implementing AI to either assign or approve. I don't think we approve campground bookings, but if it's anywhere in that process, it's probably relatively low risk. Whereas if we're deciding on someone's application for a visa or a benefit or something that is much more critical and impactful, then that risk level goes up. So as part of that, we have the Algorithmic Impact Assessment. It's a very long title. We call it the AIA, which allows departments to go through an automated questionnaire, and it helps identify these ethical issues and risks. The risks on the vulnerability of clients, the type of data that's being used in the system, the impact on the environment, the risks of using personal information in an AI context. So we put all that into a questionnaire, which, by the way, is freely and publicly available on GitHub, and out comes a score, a very simple score, 1 to 4 on that risk level. But what happens is you then go back to our directive, and with that score, it tells you what are some of the things that have to be put into place to address some of those risks. So we do things like having to have peer review committees, having to be able to have, as I mentioned earlier, publishing where the data is coming from that you use to train the systems, making sure citizens are aware when there's an automated decision-making system in the process. So all of these things address the risks of the outcomes of implementing those AI systems, and we believe that that's absolutely critical, especially when we don't have necessarily all of the answers on the technology side from a traceability and a review capability. We also have to be very, very mindful of personal information when we're dealing with data that it belongs to citizens and is about them. We have to make sure that it's always protected, and things like anonymizing data and making it discoverable and using large data sets to uncover new and very valuable information is all very, very positive, but we have to make sure that those systems cannot determine who the individuals are involved in those processes. So it's all that to say, it's very, very important to put all those things into practice. And recognizing I'm maybe talking to some folks in the private sector or research areas, this is going to be an area that we're very interested in, making sure that built into the technologies is explainability and traceability, and that expectation that AI systems will start to talk to each other. So we need standards and we need policies that are going to be able to ensure that when we implement these systems, we will be able to do so and still uphold the principles that I just talked about. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. That's great. And you've talked quite a bit, Mark, about really the things which we should do, and certainly that's important to know what the kind of positive things are to be doing. But also, we know, Mark, we hear all the time in the news and the mainstream media and popular press about misuse of AI, or AI being either intentionally or inadvertently being used in sort of the wrong ways. So just taking a broader look, Mark, what are some of the pitfalls that you would encourage folks to be mindful of and going in eyes wide open when they're trying to develop or implement an AI strategy?
Great question. So I think the first thing we need to do is we need to be clear on what is and isn't AI. I can tell you that in that directive that I just talked about, the reason why we call it the Directive on Automated Decision Making is we didn't want to get into that debate. We didn't want to get into the debate of what qualifies as AI and what doesn't, because it's a fast evolving technology space, and anything we would put on paper would be probably obsolete very quickly. So that's why we focused on what it does versus what it is. But from a strategy perspective, I think we have to recognize that it is an umbrella term. So understanding what the differences are between machine learning, automation, robotic process automation, neural networks, all of those things. And is there a difference materially to what we're trying to accomplish with those technologies? Many different technologies will have different purposes, and they will be better at some and others. So I think that has to be taken into account, or else you risk confusion. Also, trying not to boil the ocean. Efforts should be targeted in their scope, objectives, and desired outcomes. It is such a broad field, and not just about the definition, but even within the specific areas, there's so much potential there. So we need targeted policy instruments, we need targeted strategies. There can be an umbrella strategy, like I said earlier, if we're looking to become world leaders in AI space, I think a broad strategy is necessary. But within that also some targeted specialty strategies to make sure that we're focusing on the right things and addressing specific risks, such as I talked about earlier, the biases and the explainability. Also, considering AI in isolation would also be a mistake. I think we need to align our strategies to corporate plans, objectives of the government, but also a data strategy. And you can't have one without the other. You need to have plans on how are you going to manage and govern the data. How are you going to make sure it becomes available, but it is properly reviewed, properly looked at against bias. Another mistake is considering the needs of the organization or not considering the needs of the organization. So automating for the right reasons has to be driven by business needs, focusing on outcomes and showing how AI can support these. And it's also important to support innovation for innovation's sake. So having the ability to have research funds to go explore and look for new things that we didn't know either about the technology or about the outcomes possible from it. And lastly, I would say, again, a nod to avoiding ethics washing, making sure that ethics and frameworks are applied in practice, and always have an eye on legitimacy and trust, because those are absolutely critical to the adoptability and the acceptance of these technologies.
Thank you, Mark. That's great advice. So certainly you've covered a lot of ground around what things should be done and also what things should not be done. I think that's very comprehensive advice, Mark. Now, I did hear you mention the word frameworks, and I find that quite exciting and interesting, Mark, because frameworks are useful as sort of these organizing principles, these interpretive frames through which we can take big problems and break them down and solve them in a structured and systematic manner. And what's interesting is, Mark, I'm sure it's quite well known that many frameworks have been proposed recently and for quite some time now in the private and the public sector related to AI. Which ones of these have you found to be, Mark, useful or interesting or helpful in the type of strategic leadership work that you do?
Thank you. There are a lot of things going on, and we spend quite a bit of time internationally looking at what other organizations are doing, and we want to learn and we want to cherry pick the best of those elements to build our own. So some of the interesting examples: Denmark, the UK, and the US all include elements of their strategy around ethics. They call them various different names, but everyone is seized with this: responsible AI, ethical use, trustworthy, AI for good. It's a common theme, and I think we really have to take heed of that. It cannot go as an afterthought. Also, there are various measures to foster adoption of AI. In Denmark, by identifying and opening 5 government data sets that may be most important for AI progress in all sectors. And here, competition is not a bad thing. Allowing multiple algorithms, multiple strategies against the same data sets may result in different results, and we'll learn from that. So that's a good thing. In Estonia, they ensure that their government drives demand for AI solutions. So the government is a customer of AI as well as a proponent of it. And I think we're taking that strategy a little bit as well. Many departments are looking at how they can be early adopters of AI solutions. Maybe I'll just take a bit of an aside here and mention that 2 years ago, we worked with PSPC to create an ethical AI source list. And we have over 100 companies on that list. And it is a procurement vehicle that is designed to be agile and flexible, but also with that view of ethics. So the system is designed to be consultative. So you don't have to go out with a pre-baked solution. You can go to this ecosystem with a problem, work with them on defining pilots, prototypes, and whittling it down to the best solution. And then there's procurement capabilities to do that. So anyone looking to do that in the government, I would highly recommend you take a look at that. But sort of back to what I was saying from the international perspective, the USA is taking an approach of investing in their infrastructure, education, and training, and those are bedrocks of AI capabilities. So that's certainly something we should take into account. There's also various investments in the growth of AI. The UK is looking at how they can focus on commercialization, so supporting their industries, their startups in commercialization of AI. We're also seeing R&D as important components of strategies in the US and Estonia. And an interesting example for government operations, as seen in the US strategy, they task specific government departments and agencies for certain activities. For example, making certain data available for training, or making a department responsible for developing standards. This is something that I think we should also pay very close attention to. We tend to have duplicative efforts across our many departments and agencies, and having some focused on specific things and being recognized as the government center of excellence for specific components is probably worth thinking about. We're also investing in AI. In the last budget that came out a few weeks ago, the government is committing to renew the Pan-Canadian AI strategy, allocating up to $443.8 million to helping commercialize AI innovations and research, attracting and retaining top talent, enhancing R&D and training, building digital infrastructure, and developing standards. So I think we are learning from what other people are doing around the world, and building that into to some of our strategies. So our strategy needs to align to this. We've also established strategic partnerships with industry leaders like Microsoft Canada to advance cross-sector collaborations. And Vic, I know that NRCan has the digital accelerator that is overseeing a wide range of AI and data science projects. Do you want to talk about that? I'd be very curious to see what NRCan is doing.
Yes, thank you, Mark, absolutely. And I very much appreciate your giving us a shout out. And I also want to start by thanking and saying that, Mark, you've created that space for all of our departments to truly collaborate and experiment and drive new models of partnership, as you just mentioned. But also really for us, the focus is, Mark, we focus on policy, but science underpins our policy. So one of the things that we did is that bringing together a team of expert data scientists under one roof and working closely, Mark, with our domain specialists, our domain scientists, as well as with our policy leaders to apply state-of-the-art techniques in computer vision, natural language processing, reinforcement learning to solve some of the problems which were up until now not tractable to solve and things like that. So that's one of the things we've done. Definitely to your point on partnerships, we're really looking at public-private partnerships as the way of the future, simply because we have a lot of data, we have a lot of expertise, we have a lot of data scientists, but so do our private sector partners. So why can't we look into a win-win type collaborative everybody wins model, Mark? Also making sure that there's full line of sight that our executives have in the department into our decision making and into our rationale. So that's the way we build credibility. That's how we build the license within the department to be able to scale. And last but not the least is also just really focusing on the culture issue, Mark, which you talked about, because we certainly don't want to be a sort of a group of experts sort of sitting in a room and they're the only ones who specialize in AI, and really trying to uplift and elevate the collective digital quotient, Mark, or the digital acumen of our colleagues. Not everybody wants to become a data scientist, nor should that be the goal, but certainly having that osmosis. So organizing knowledge sharing sessions, Synthetic Intelligence Forum certainly is a part of that as well, Mark. So very much appreciate your giving us a shout out and working also closely with many departments, Mark, across the government to help them start up their own digital accelerators, sort of using our blueprint and our roadmap as well, and very much enjoying the partnership with your team as well, Mark, to make that happen. But thank you.
Oh, that sounds great. And that's the type of leadership we need, because, as you said, we can't assume that working in an echo chamber or a closed environment that will come up with the answers. We need new inputs, just like AI does. And you guys are working very hard to make that happen. So congratulations.
Thank you, Mark. So the next question I'd like to ask you is, you've touched on this topic a few times today about just the pace of change. I mean, all technology, as we know, evolves, changes rapidly, sort of shifts and transforms. AI is very interesting because every day we look in the mainstream media or the popular press, there is some sensational headline about some new breakthrough result. In many of the areas of AI, it's becoming big, it's becoming deep, and it's changing very quickly. So Mark, how do you ensure and sort of just focus on keeping the colleagues in your team up to speed on all of these breakthroughs coming out very quickly, but more importantly, making sure that the AI strategy remains current and relevant through time and over time?
Yeah, great question. So any strategy needs to be evergreen. There's no question about that. You can give yourself a time horizon. It's a 3-year strategy. It's a 5-year strategy. I don't see very many 10-year strategies anymore. But with AI, this is particularly important because the technology is changing so quickly, because the field is so broad, and because new capabilities keep coming up. And I really, truly believe that we're going to start to see many more synergies around different capabilities coming together and working together to deliver results greater than the sum of its parts. So that's going to be a very, very important but challenging factor to keep on top of, because it's going to happen quickly. The other aspect of it is public perception and acceptability are evolving. As you said, there's a lot of headlines. There's a lot of sensational headlines. I don't think we have seen the train wreck headlines yet, but they'll happen inevitably. There will be some issues that won't work. I shouldn't say that. I can think of a couple that were probably train wreck-ish. But public trust and acceptance of what is artificial intelligence will evolve, and strategies need to keep up to date with that. The acceptance today of certain automated things may not be the same as tomorrow, so understanding that is critical. There are also emerging laws and regulations that need to be considered. I think this is going to be something that more and more countries will adopt in requirements to either directives or policies or legislation on what can and can't be given to automated systems. So there's an increasing need to review it often. I think that's the first step. So some ways to keep a strategy relevant: build in a review period. That's what we did with the directive on automated decision making. In fact, because we knew we were the first out of the gate internationally, but it was also the first within government to kind of define this risk. We're going to review it every 6 months, and a review doesn't have to lead to a change, but oftentimes at least you've given it that close consideration. And in the last 3 reviews, I think we have changed it twice. Small changes, but it is evolving, so that's important. Also defining clear accountabilities for AI and the data in an organization, making sure the person who is on the hook knows and is it doesn't become something that through reorgs and people leaving gets set on a shelf and no one is accountable for it. So making sure that ownership persists. Start a review by looking at the outcomes that you're looking for. Always have the end goal in mind, so you don't lose sight of that. And if you understand what those business objectives are, when you do that review, you can say, are we still on track? Are we still moving in the right direction, or do we need to adjust course? You can also look at if it's still aligned to the business priorities. Does it cover the emerging technologies? Does it conflict with any new laws and regulations? Does it cover all the relevant partners and stakeholders within the organization and outside of it? As Vic just talked about, it's critical to have outside input, but that changes over time, and so do you need to adjust for that? And are the assumptions still valid that were made at the beginning, or do they need to be revisited due to the rapid pace of research or findings about data or other inputs that could have significant impacts? So all of this takes significant effort. It's a continuous effort, and it also needs to be funded appropriately. So that would be the last piece I would add, is making sure you have the ongoing funding and commitment of the organization to keep it up and report back. That's the other aspect of it.
Thank you, Marc. That's a great answer. And there's a question I'd like to now pose that come from the audience, and it's interesting because certainly as the senior most technology leader executive in the government of Canada, this question is more about AI, but also more about cybersecurity. So part of it is that because of AI applications, startups and other organizations are putting more and more data in the cloud. So Marc, can you take this from two angles? One is the application of AI to cybersecurity, but also the concerns around cybersecurity caused by the fact that AI is now propelling all of these data sets into the cloud. Thank you, Marc.
Thanks. Yeah, and that's a really good question. And that's exactly how I see it. AI, when it comes to cybersecurity, is going to be an offense and a defensive weapon. And I think that depending on which side of that equation you are, it's going to be critical to stay on top of that, to the point where we will probably see AI, nefarious AI, so AI attack bots, if we will, that will not be, no human would be able to keep up with. So we will need defensive mechanisms in AI that are able to react in real time to real threats and protect our systems like we haven't seen yet. Today, we have, generally speaking, two main cyber defense strategies. We have pattern-based, so signature-based knowns. We look for patterns we've seen before, and behavior-based, where we look for not the patterns, because we often see zero-day attacks, but the outcomes. What is the system doing that it shouldn't be doing, and is that a good sign that we're under attack, and how do we react to it? So both those strategies, I think, will be augmented with a third, which is really going to be about that active monitoring and response of what we're seeing on the perimeter, within the network, within our systems, to address that. And that's going to be a war of escalation that we're just going to have to keep up with, because if the bad guys have better technology than you, they're going to get in. So we have to make sure that we keep up with that. And just on the question about protecting small and medium enterprises, I will give a shout out to the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity. They have been set up specifically to provide information and ways for small and medium organizations, among others, to protect themselves. I highly encourage you to visit their website, see what they have to offer. They have a lot of good strategies on what you can do. And in terms of the cloud, the cloud is just someone else's network, as we've all seen. But really, what it does is it allows you to take advantage of the massive investments that those cloud service providers are investing in their infrastructure to provide the best cyber protection possible. So if you're using cloud, and I do recommend that you do, understand what those capabilities are and understand how to best take advantage of them. I guarantee you that the Microsofts, Amazons, and Googles of the world are spending way more on cybersecurity than you and I are, and that's something we should take advantage of.
Thank you, Mark. So another question I have that then, in our synthetic intelligence forum, Mark, we have a whole community of folks that are involved in data science as practitioners, as applied researchers, and the like. And we know that the government of Canada has a number of great opportunities for these folks to come in and contribute their knowledge and to contribute a lot of value. So, Mark, how would you advise folks that are interested, after having heard what you said, are interested in applying for jobs in the government of Canada, these kinds of jobs? What's the best way for them to start finding these jobs to apply to?
So the simplest answer is jobs.gc.ca, which is our platform for all job openings open to the public in Canada. But that might be one aspect of it. I would also look at understanding where the government is headed and who's doing what, so you can be a little bit more targeted in what departments you're looking for. In our CAN, where Vic is a great example, and there are some others where there's a lot of great AI work. Because becoming an employee is certainly one of the best ways to do it, but there are other options. There's research grants, there's fellows, there's different things like that. So get to know us, get to know what we're doing, and get to know the people. I think that's a great way to start.
Thank you, Mark. We have a question here from one of our AI champion colleagues in Transport Canada, and they're asking a great question about, Mark, you touched on funding and just having that kind of stability and sort of long-range planning ability when you get longer-term funding envelopes. How would you advise departments to actually seek and obtain the right kind of funding levels for the right time periods, Mark, rather than getting short-term and sort of not the full amount of spend required?
Yeah. So this is something I tell CFOs all the time. No investment in digital broadly, and AI I would include in that, should ever be one time. Every piece of technology we invest in has an ongoing cost until it's time to get rid of it. But while it's still there, the infrastructure needs to be evergreened. The software needs to be patched. It needs to be kept modern. We have to make sure we're always vigilant around the cyber threats, and we need the people to support it. So we call that transitioning from project management to product management. And if you're familiar with product management approaches, it really is about an ongoing life cycle of continuous improvement, continuous operations, continuous support. So I would suggest that you look at that. But even if you're not getting into product management specifically, when you're starting to look at any type of funding exercises for any type of investment, make sure there is an ongoing piece that is there to support it. And as a broad, very broad rule of thumb, 20 to 25% of initial investment is usually what it costs to support any systems on an ongoing basis. 20 to 25% on the infrastructure side means you're doing an IT refresh cycle every 4 to 5 years. That's not very far off. You could push that a little bit. On software, we know that that's usually what the maintenance and support costs are. And then on people side as well, if you had 10 developers developing a piece of software for a year, you probably need 2, maybe even 3 on an ongoing basis to maintain it, address bugs, continue to support the business and evolving its requirements, things like that. So it's a rough rule of thumb, but it's not far off.
Thank you, Mark. And actually, since you mentioned, this idea of looking into the value, I think this is important too, because ultimately any investment decision is justified on the basis of the costs and the expected benefits. And one of the projects that we are actually working on, Mark, in the Digital Accelerator in my department, is to build such a framework, a systematic and structured framework to ascribe some type of value to data and digital assets. And that way, once you have that value ascribed to it, you can do all types of portfolio optimization, prioritization. Even when you have a cloud data hub, for instance, Mark, you can't possibly just move all of your sort of on-premise data assets in one shot to the cloud, and nor would you want to, because certainly there would be opportunities where it doesn't make sense to put certain data sets for various reasons in the cloud. So would you like to comment on that, Mark?
So you just made a former colleague of mine very happy, because he used to always promote that we should be able to ascribe value to all data. It does have a value. We all know that. It's hard to sometimes put a number or capture a number, but I always say understand what those outcomes are. So the outcomes you're going to get from that data or that system or that whatever the investment is should be measurable, and it's sometimes intangible. In the government, we have unique requirements that are hard to put numbers around. Protection of life, quality of life, national security, those types of things. But we can describe them, and we can describe them as having benefits that are offset by the costs of realizing those benefits. And that's generally how you would describe any business case. And when you can describe that business case, it becomes a lot easier to describe the expenses and the ongoing expenses that I was talking about, because you can offset them with, here's why, here's the value we're going to create to do that. So I do very much encourage that those activities, and Vic, I'd love to see the outcome of that, because I know it's not easy.
Thank you, Mark, and we'd be happy to partner with you and benefit from your leadership and sage advice as well. Here's a good question too. In your role, Mark, you oversee the innovation and the improvement of many different policies in many different areas. So can you walk us through a little bit about what is the process like, Mark, in your office when you have a data strategy or an AI strategy? How does it actually get about recalibrated to be current through time?
Yeah, that's something we've struggled with. I think we just released the new policy on service and digital, and some of the policies that replaced were getting long in the tooth. They were 10, 15 years old. So while I'm preaching it, I'm not always good at it. We have to get better. We have to get better at being responsive to those needs and understanding where that impact comes from. So one of the things we did, first we consolidated our policies. So we have a policy on service and digital that is meant to be an umbrella for all of our IT policies and service as well. And I always use shorthand: digital means service plus technology. But it's meant to be a recognition that we only do technology for a business purpose. The other thing we did is, by consolidating, we were able, and this is only going to mean something if you're in government, but we were able to create a structure with directives and guidance and standards. And if you know anything about the machinery of government, the lower you go on that chain, the easier they are to keep up to date. They require less review time. They require less high authorities to change them. So it gives us the opportunity to be more nimble. Another example of that is we released the standard on user and fit-ups for the GC, and the way we did it is literally as an annex to a standard, to a directive, to a policy. And the reason for that is because we expect that to change on a very frequent basis, and we're seeing this right now with COVID. Our user fit-up standards a year ago are very different than they are today, and we need that ability to keep them ever fresh. And so that's some of the things we're doing.
Thank you, Mark. Here's another good question from the audience, which is about, with all of these AI projects going on in the government, are there any plans to collectivize some of the lessons learned and maybe not only share them within government, but also share them outside of government?
So, yeah, that's a great question, and I fully agree with the concept. We learn way more from our failures than our successes. So whenever we have, especially the highly publicized failures, we go through lessons learned, audits, reports, all sorts of things, and we do try to collect those, and we do have those discussions around what do we learn, what did we take away from these, and how do we make sure that they don't go into, they don't continue, and how do we change our processes to adapt to them. But that is a very inward-facing exercise. It's really to improve ourselves, and that's sort of the point. But I do like the idea of being able to share them. And the highly publicized ones are usually made public in some form, whether it's an ATIP or press or others. But we should have a bit of a more concerted look at our failures as a whole, and how do we make sure we capture all of those into one. So I'll take that back, and I think we should do something about that.
Thank you, Mark. Also, we have a few folks on this live stream that are representatives from software organizations or founders and entrepreneurs of startups. So, Mark, given that the field of AI is evolving so quickly, and we have a lot of organizations of different sizes playing in this market, how would you advise them to actually engage with the government? There are traditional procurement vehicles. Are there any thoughts to perhaps have some other ways of engaging with the private sector partners as well?
Yeah, so I talked a bit about that AI source list. If you're in the AI space, I think we refresh that source list every 1 or 2 years. I'd highly encourage you to take a look at that. It was really meant to be an agile process that is both flexible to apply for. I think there are 3 questions to get on it, as well as agile for the government to engage with you, to be able to lay our problems out, have a discussion, and start to chart a course where we can have engagement with multiple vendors to define pilots, define learning criteria, and then a selection process that allows us to get down to that final solution. So in the AI space, we think that that's pretty versatile. More broadly speaking, again, having been in your shoes, the buy and sell website gives you all of the formal procurement processes that are going on, and we are committed to being open and transparent, so we will always use that process. But it doesn't hurt to know what's going on and to know the directions that the government is going in. So to that end, we just last week published the Digital Operations Strategic Plan. Encourage you to look that up. It gives you a bit of an idea of how we're aligning our priorities and where we're going. And it gives you an opportunity to see what might come out of that process as departments take that guidance and develop their own internal IT plans. So those would be my recommendations.
Thank you, Mark. And you touched in some of your answers on the importance of partnership, Mark, and at your level working with your peers and other national governments. Can you maybe comment a little bit on some of the conversations you're having in terms of partnerships relating to AI with partners and allies in other countries?
Sure. So there's a couple of different forums for that. And maybe I'll just say that one of the things I believe in strongly with any engagements with partners, whether it be vendors, whether it be other forms of government in Canada or internationally, we want to create win-win. So I invest the time and energy in explaining what we're doing, because I believe that what will come back is advice and preparedness that is more closely aligned to where we're going. So I think that that's a very worthwhile activity. So some of the places we do that, ISED runs the AI Strategy Council, I think it's called, or Advisory Council, which is made up of many of the top AI firms and academia across Canada. And that's a very valuable and rich discussion on where things are going in the AI space. We are also part of what's called the Digital Nations, which is the top 10, I'll say top 10, but others may disagree with me. But 10 of the countries around the world that are committed to digital government and advancing digitization within their organizations. So that's a very useful and engaging forum. We meet a couple of times a year, including at the ministerial level, to understand what are the priorities across countries and sharing information where we can. So AI has been a very big topic in the last couple of years. Data is a very big topic. And new this year, we're introducing, I hope I can say this publicly, but we're introducing greening government as a strategy that aligns very closely with the objectives of digital. So we're trying to advance all of those files, and that international forum helps a lot to do that.
Thank you, Mark. So just the last question for you, Mark, is around academic researchers. So we covered job seekers, we covered providers of these types of solutions. I think it's important to also cover from an academic angle. Mark, if there are researchers that do want to work with your team and with the broader Government of Canada team on the Algorithmic Impact Assessment tool or the Directive on Automated Decision Making, what's the right way to partner with your organization?
Great question. Great opportunity for me to plug my team. And I won't know the address, but what I would suggest is if you look up either the Automated Decision Making Directive, the Algorithmic Impact Assessment, we did all of that work in open and consultative fashion, and so that work continues, as well as the feedback. As I said, we do a review of that every 6 months. If you look up those things either on our website or on GitHub, you'll find access to the people on my team that are working on that, and they'll be very happy to engage with you and hear what you have to say, because we do take that very seriously and recognize that we can't operate in a vacuum, so your feedback in that space is critical.
Okay, well, Mark, since you did mention GitHub, maybe I can sneak in one last question with your kind permission.
Sure.
What is the position that the government takes in terms of putting developments and innovations on in the public domain, especially on sites like GitHub?
Yep. So we have published the digital standards, which is the top 10 digital principles that we live by, and working in the open is one of them. Using open source and open standards is another. We really believe that promotes openness, innovation, greater speed to market because we're reusing and we're collaborating, as well as just getting better ideas. We don't have all the answers, so it's very important that we work with the outside communities to look for those wherever we can. So those open source communities and GitHub, as an example, are really, really valuable in getting those ideas. And it has to be a two-way exchange. It's not just us taking; we have to give back. So we encourage people to work in those spaces and publish where we can. There are certain things that, for security reasons, national security and whatnot, we wouldn't publish. But most code is not classified. And if there are any developers in the room, they know that you look for pieces of code that fulfill a specific function. You're not looking for the whole encyclopedia of how we manage whatever systems we manage. So that's a great opportunity and a great way to do that.
Thank you, Mark. That was a great way to round out our conversation today. I really appreciate your making time in your busy schedule to come join us, and definitely want to thank you for a thoughtful and thought-provoking a series of ideas you've shared with us. Now, I know that the field changes very, very rapidly, so we'd love to have you back in a few months, Mark, and maybe give us a more sort of updated landscape and a view of the land. But on behalf of the Synthetic Intelligence Forum, let me thank you sincerely, Mark, and hope to see you again very soon.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you for having me. Thank you for taking the time to listen to me, to the audience. And thanks for those questions. Those were really insightful. So I appreciate that.
Thank you, Mark. Bye for now. Bye, everybody.
Have a great day.